Hello everyone, my name is Misha and I'm going to be talking about leadership and decision making in sea kayaking trip leadership. And this is a kind of framework that I have kind of developed over the course of the last 10 or 15 years for the way that I make decisions about choosing the appropriate level of challenge for a team. Now, it's very likely that this is not the only framework for decision making. I'm sure there's other ones out there, and that's absolutely fine. This is just kind of how I have come to think about it. So I've kind of divided up the different factors that affect our decision making, and then we'll dig into those, and then we'll kind of look at the balancing, how we balance those factors to decide if a challenge or a trip or weather conditions or whatever are appropriate for the team. So I'm going to start with exactly that. So I'm going to start with the team. So if we consider the team and what goes into it. So I've written down team here, and then I'm thinking about the kinds of things that we tend to think about with respect to teams and to the people that make up teams. So we might, for example, think about stamina. So do the members of our team have enough stamina for the trip, the distances, for the challenge that's being proposed? Do they have the correct skill level to match the challenge? Mindset is a classic one. If the mindset isn't there, sometimes even of one person, it can really destroy the group, the mentality of the group, the mentality and the morale of the group. So that's an important thing to consider. And then of course we have ourselves, the leader, which we are part of the team. So we may have a lot of experience as a leader, or we may not have a lot of experience as a leader, which feeds into our team and picking the correct kind of challenge for the team. Oh, I've gone away off squint here. Let's see if I can straighten this up. Okay, so that is the team. Now, we may not know anything about the team, and this is the thing, is that we can potentially have a situation where we don't actually know anything about the team there. So I'm just going to join these up so that they're all connected to team, like that. And this question mark over the top is to say that we may not necessarily know. We may not know our team. We may have a new group of people, and that is that very much feeds into our kind of equation and our decision making process, and that's just potentially just a reality of the situation, and something that we have to factor in. So second, I'm going to put down here, I'm going to put location. Now, the kinds of things that we might be thinking about with location are really the severity of where it is. So, is there any shelter? Which I'm going to put this in yellow colour. So, is there any shelter? And that could include shelter from the wind, or it could be from the open ocean with all the things that brings, swell, wind waves, etc. So a location might provide shelter. So, for example, a sea loch that's very deeply cut into the mountains is quite well sheltered from the wind in a multitude of directions. So that would feed into our equation. The other thing that might feed into our equation is remoteness. So somewhere where the coastline has got a road all the way along, and it's easy, it's very near to communication, we can get good mobile reception, etc., etc. That's a different proposition for example, from going to Mingulay or the west coast of Greenland or something like that, where we're a very, very long way away from help, and communication may be difficult, and all of the kind of the factors that come about as a result of being in a very, very remote place. So that's one other aspect of location. The other aspect is, and I'm going to say this is really important concept, contingency. So the idea that we have a backup plan. Now I'm building that into the location because quite often it is now. It's related to conditions as well, but it's to say, is there a backup plan? So if we're on a very, very small loch and we're taking out a group that we don't know, and for example there's a bit of a wind going and one or all of the group get overpowered by the wind, and all that happens is that we get washed onto quite a friendly loch shore, then this is an example of somewhere where there's very good contingency. So our plan to travel from one end of the loch to the other may have been foiled, but we've got contingency whereby it doesn't actually matter too much because there's a backup plan where we've just been washed ashore. Now, in a more serious situation, perhaps we could have a very, very strong wind, even with a group that's maybe slightly more experienced. So we could have a force 6 or a 7 wind, but if that's blowing onshore onto a very nice long sandy beach, then the worst that's going to happen if we're overpowered by the wind is that we're going to be washed onto the beach. So that's, maybe we wouldn't set out with that plan that we're all just going to get washed onto the beach, but it is a level of backup that offers us contingency. Now, the flip side of that perhaps is that we have a very strong offshore wind which is blowing us onto a remote and inaccessible coast, which has got a very heavy swell rolling in and breaking onto that coastline, making it a very, very dangerous place to be. And in that situation, if we're overpowered by the wind, then we have very little contingency, and we need to feed that into our overall equation. So yes, that's location. We've got shelter, remoteness, and contingency in there, and the kind of aspects that feed into shelter. Then our third and final kind of main factor that I'm going to talk about is, oh, I'm in the wrong setting here. Okay, so conditions, which is an obvious one, I guess, and one that we need to think about. Obviously, the big ones which we think about in terms of forecasting and the rest. Obviously, we've got the wind in there, which is a big one and has a large impact on kayaking, on sea kayaking and touring kayaking. We've got the swell as well, which again we might read off our forecasts if we're in areas exposed to the ocean. And then we've also got tidal flow. That's the three main ones, I would say, and I think we want to be cautious with these when we have any more than one stacking up. So if we have a strong wind and a swell, then we really want to be cautious that because those things can combine. The difficulties can multiply when these things combine. A strong wind and the tidal flow, we might get wind against tide, all of these kinds of aspects. So we have to be particularly careful with those, and again that all gets fed into our equation. The other thing that I'll mention, maybe not quite so important, but rain and temperature. So really from a morale perspective, and just so we're not kind of picking a challenge in the middle of winter where we're going to be paddling in the snow all day, or in somewhere that's very remote and exposed, for example. It does kind of play into the equation to some extent. So yeah, those, I'm going to join these up to conditions. Yeah, and what you might notice here is we have, if we have the team, we have setting again, so we have the letter T, location we have L, and we have C, so TLC, which is the mnemonic tender loving care could be applied. I know that as kayakers we're used to hearing so many mnemonics, but yeah, TLC does work quite well for this, and we can use that to remember the three different aspects. So yeah, now I'm going to draw in the lines to show that these are all interrelated. Okay, so how are they interrelated? So the team, the location, and the conditions. Now I'm going to say that the way that I've come to think about this is that you're allowed one wild card. So if you don't know the team so well, then you really need to be looking to have a good known location with very reasonable conditions. So in that situation, the team would be your wild card because you simply don't know the team. In another situation, if you are going to a very remote place and the location is quite extreme, then you would want to know that the conditions are going to be good and you're doing it with a team that you know. The same also could be true when you say, well, the wild card is going to be the conditions where you've got, maybe a strong wind. If you know that the team are competent for those kinds of conditions, and you choose your location carefully so that you have contingency, then that is, in my opinion, an okay situation to an okay level of challenge. Now we have to be careful. We have to be careful because obviously things are maybe not necessarily the case that there's one wild card in there. We might have conditions that are half bad, and we might have a team that we half know, for example, and in that way we get to our one kind of wild card with two halves that add up. Now I will say that we can push this out a little bit further beyond one wild card. Now we have to be aware of different aspects or different a few different things when we consider this. And one thing I'm gonna do, for example, is we want to be aware of the level of challenge generally that the team is prepared to accept. So I'm going to draw in here, I'm going to draw a bed. Now the reason why I'm drawing a bed in there is because this is our place of comfort. We don't actually need to leave our bed in the morning. Of course, we would not get to any incredible places. We would not meet any new team members and potentially make friends. We would not get the benefit of challenging ourselves in different conditions, but we would be in our comfort zone. Now obviously we can push this out in all three directions, where we could push it out with the conditions into a forest 12 or 13, which is obviously a level of challenge which is inappropriate and is life threatening. In the same way that we could push it out with the team, and we could not know anything about the team, and yeah, it would be an extreme example of taking a team somewhere that we didn't know. In the same way that we can push it out in going somewhere that's way more extreme, the location, than it should be. Now, we have to pick the correct level of challenge between those points. So, our bed, we learn nothing, we meet no one, we go nowhere interesting. But at the other extreme, we're obviously pushing that so far out that it's dangerous, basically. So we have to pick the appropriate level within all that, and that applies when we're balancing up these three aspects. So we've got our one wild card principle, and I will say that if we're going to extend it beyond one wild card, so say we have a situation where we know that the conditions are not going to be so good, we know our team, which is fine for the conditions, but we may be able to push a little bit out with the location if we know that our team is strong and we have reasonable contingency. We may be able to extend it a little bit beyond one wild card, but if we do, we have to be very, very clear that we have the reasoning for being able to do that. So I'll give you one example perhaps where extending it beyond one wild card might be appropriate. So if we had conditions that were not so good, and a team that we perhaps didn't know so well, but our location was extremely solid, and we were able to justify to ourselves that it's absolutely fine. So for example, if we were going out in a very strong force 5 wind with a team that we maybe didn't know, but we were doing it in a bay where it was an onshore wind onto a very sandy beach, then our contingency is extremely strong in that situation. So it's not that we can just kind of throw caution to the wind, literally, but we can extend that beyond one wild card, which would be the conditions, to say, well, we don't necessarily know the team completely, but our location is very, very solid. So in that situation, it's a good example where we're able to reason very clearly that the situation is okay. Now, that location, I think it would be possible to do a whole other session, a whole other kind of micro session on the location to talk through some of the aspects of that in terms of contingency, but that's beyond this session. All I'll say really, is that we're balancing these, the team, the location and the conditions, TLC, and then within those we've got the wind, the swell and the tidal flow, and it kind of works in a similar way. We're allowed one wild card perhaps with the conditions, one wind, but when things start to compound, then it becomes tricky. So it's a kind of almost like a fractal situation within team, within conditions, within location. But yeah, that's basically the approach that I take to decision making, and that's the framework that I apply when I'm thinking about is the level of challenge and the trip appropriate for the group that we have. And it's important to emphasize that we as leaders, we have control of all of these. I know you say, well, we don't have control of the conditions, but indirectly we do tend to have control of the conditions in that we don't need to get onto the water, or we can move somewhere else where the conditions are different. And I think a lot of the time mistakes are made when we stick to a plan that was made too rigidly rather than changing. And we need to be aware that we can change the conditions, we can change the location, and we as leaders are in charge of the team. So we need to do everything that we can to find out about the team, and that might be to phone team members before that we don't know, to find out about their experience level, what their last 3 trips were, for example, and any digging that we can do to get to know the team is really a huge advantage. But also within that, we need to remember that we have the ability to turn around and say, look, this trip is not for you. So we do have control of all of these aspects, and we need to remember that. But yeah, that's the framework: team, location, conditions, 1 wild card. Anything beyond that needs to be very clearly justified and justifiable. The logic needs to be there. Hope that's helpful.